What was the biggest golden child moment you've ever witnessed? I've read a lot of golden child stories over the years, the missed birthdays, the double standards, the well, you're the responsible one excuses parents lean on when they don't want to examine their own favoritism. I thought I'd heard every version of it. And I watched what happened at my cousin's engagement party 2 summers ago, and I realized I'd never actually seen the full, unfiltered version play out in real time in front of an entire room of witnesses until that night. I'm Jennifer, I'm 36. This isn't even my direct family, it's my aunt's side, my mom's sister Sandra and her 2 kids, my cousins Chris and Amanda. But I was close enough to the family and present for enough of it that I feel like I earned a front row seat to what might be the single most blatant piece of golden child behavior I've ever personally witnessed. Some quick background because the dynamic matters. My Aunt Sandra has 2 kids, Chris, the older one, and Amanda, 2 years younger. I'm as far back as I can remember, and I mean literally childhood memories. Going back to when we were all under 10, Chris was positioned as the golden child in a way that was almost comedic in how unsubtle it was. Class president, honor roll, star of the swim team, every accomplishment got the full spotlight treatment. Framed photos on the mantle, announcements at every family gathering, a dedicated section of Sandra's Facebook that basically functioned as a Chris fan page. Amanda, meanwhile, was quieter, more introverted, dealt with some anxiety issues through her teens that Sandra never seemed to have much patience for, and generally got treated as the difficult one despite, from my outside vantage point, at least, never actually doing anything particularly difficult. She just wasn't as shiny. He got good grades, nothing spectacular, went to solid but unglamorous state school, became a physical therapist, which is a genuinely respectable and difficult profession that Sandra somehow always managed to describe at family events in the most deflating possible terms. "Oh, Amanda's still doing the therapy thing," she'd say in a tone you'd use for someone's failed hobby, right before pivoting to a 20-minute update on whatever Chris was up to. Chris, for context, works in finance, makes good money, and is, I want to be fair here, a genuinely likable guy in a vacuum. This isn't really a story about Chris being a villain. It's a story about Sandra and the machinery of favoritism she built and apparently couldn't turn off even for one night that wasn't about him at all. The party in question was Amanda's engagement party, hers. She'd gotten engaged to her boyfriend of 4 years, a genuinely great guy named Ryan, third Ryan in my extended orbit, apparently a popular name in this generation, and the family rented out a nice event space for it, maybe 80 guests, a proper celebration. Amanda had clearly put a lot of thought into it. There was a small slideshow set up on a screen near the entrance, cycling through photos of her and Ryan over the years, the trip where he proposed, old pictures from when they first started dating, family photos. It was sweet, understated, exactly the kind of thing you'd expect at an engagement party celebrating the actual couple being celebrated. About 45 minutes into the party, Sandra got up to give a toast. Totally normal, totally expected, mother of the bride-to-be, this is exactly the moment for that. She started out fine, actually. Said some nice things about Amanda as a kid, mentioned how proud she was, mentioned Ryan being a great addition to the family. Standard stuff, a little generic, but nice. Then, and I want to be precise about this transition because it happened so smoothly that I don't think Sandra herself even registered she was doing it. She said something like, "And you know, seeing Amanda settle down like this really makes me think about the family we've built." Speaking of which, I have to brag for a second because Chris just got promoted to VP at his firm last week, and I'm just so incredibly proud of everything he's accomplished. Then she spent the next 4 minutes, I actually timed a video someone took later out of pure disbelief, talking about Chris. His promotion, his new apartment, funny story about his last vacation. She circled back eventually, tacking on something like, "And of course we're so happy for Amanda too," in the last 10 seconds, almost as an afterthought, before sitting back down to applause that was noticeably more subdued than it had been for the earlier Amanda-focused part of the toast. I remember looking around the room during this and watching people's faces shift, that particular collective silent recalibration a room does when everyone simultaneously realizes they just watched something a little bit wrong but nobody's sure yet whether to acknowledge it out loud. I was seated close enough to see Amanda's expression throughout the toast, and I think that's actually the detail that stuck with me longest, more than the toast content itself. She didn't look shocked, exactly, and that's the part that got me. She looked like someone watching a pattern she'd seen play out 100 times before, just this time in the worst possible venue, in front of everyone she'd ever want to impress on what was supposed to be her night. There was a flicker of something, hurt maybe, or just exhaustion, and then her face settled into a practiced, polite smile, the smile of someone who has learned over 3 decades exactly how to absorb this specific kind of disappointment without letting it show too much. Ryan, her fiancé, had a much less practiced reaction. I watched him lean over and say something to her. I couldn't hear what, but I could see his jaw tighten, and Amanda gave a small headshake, the universal gesture for "not now, please don't make this a thing." Here's the part that, even now, genuinely amazes me and how unaware Sandra seemed to be of what she was doing. Over the course of the rest of the party, probably another 2.5 hours, I counted, and I'm not exaggerating, at least 6 more separate instances where Sandra redirected a conversation toward Chris. Someone would come up to congratulate her on Amanda's engagement, and within 30 seconds Sandra would pivot. "Thank you so much, speaking of exciting news, did you hear Chris just," and off she'd go again. At one point, Chris himself, to his credit I should say, actually tried to redirect a couple of these moments. I watched him at least twice gently steer the conversation back. "Mom, tonight's about Amanda," said with what looked like genuine, slightly embarrassed sincerity. Sandra would nod, agree, and then within 10 minutes find her way back to a Chris update anyway, seemingly without any awareness that she was repeating the exact behavior her own son had just gently called out. The most jaw-dropping moment of the night, though, the one that actually made a few people in my orbit audibly gasp, came near the end of the evening during the cake cutting. Amanda and Ryan were cutting the small celebration cake, everyone gathered around with phones out, a genuinely lovely little moment. Sandra, apparently unable to help herself, called out from the back of the group, loud enough for most of the room to hear. "This reminds me we need to start planning Chris's birthday party too. 30 is a big one." Chris's birthday, for context, was 4 months away. There was an actual audible pause in the room, that specific kind of silence that happens when a room collectively decides not to acknowledge something out loud, but everyone clocks it anyway. Amanda's mom, of the bride best friend standing near me, actually turned to her husband and mouthed something I couldn't hear but could absolutely read the shape of. Did she seriously just do that? Amanda, for her part, just kept cutting the cake, that same practiced smile locked in place, like a woman who had trained herself over decades not to give her mother the reaction that moments like this were clearly, if unconsciously, fishing for. I talked to Amanda a couple weeks later, mostly because I couldn't stop thinking about that night and wanted to check in without being weird about it. She was remarkably level about the whole thing, more level than I think I would have been in her position. She said it wasn't even really a surprise to her. If anything, she said she'd almost expected something like it, because Sandra had done smaller versions of the same thing at basically every major milestone of Amanda's life. Her college graduation had gotten a similar treatment, apparently a graduation party where Sandra spent a chunk of her toast updating everyone on Chris's internship. Even Amanda's physical therapy licensing exam, which she'd passed on her first attempt after months of brutal studying, had gone a lukewarm "that's great, honey" before the conversation pivoted to some new detail about Chris's apartment renovation. What struck me most talking to her was how she framed it, not with bitterness exactly, more with a kind of tired clarity. "I stopped expecting the spotlight a long time ago," she told me. "I just didn't think she'd manage to steal it at my own engagement party." That felt like a new record, even for her. She and Ryan did end up saying something to Sandra a few days after the party, gently but directly, that it had hurt, that the night was supposed to be about the two of them, that the Chris tangents, especially the birthday comment during the cake cutting, had genuinely stung. Sandra's response, according to Amanda, was a mix of surprise and defensiveness. She apparently didn't fully register how much airtime she'd given Chris throughout the night, insisted she was just proud of both my kids, and seemed almost hurt herself that Amanda would bring it up at all, framing Amanda's feelings as an overreaction rather than sitting with the pattern being pointed out to her. Which, if you've read enough of these golden child stories, probably sounds exactly as familiar to you as it did to me. I've witnessed plenty of smaller-scale favoritism in my extended family and among friends' families over the years. The classic stuff: forgotten birthdays, double standards around curfews, one sibling's failures explained away while another's identical failures get a lecture. There was something almost surreally on the nose about watching a mother hijack her own daughter's engagement toast, not once but repeatedly across an entire evening, culminating in announcing a birthday party for her other child during the actual cake cutting of the event that was supposed to be unambiguously not about him. It wasn't cruelty exactly. I don't think Sandra set out that night intending to diminish Amanda. That's almost what made it more unsettling to witness. It was pure, unconscious muscle memory, a habit so deeply worn into her that she genuinely couldn't help herself, even on the one night where the spotlight was contractually, explicitly, unmistakably supposed to belong to someone else. Amanda got married about 8 months later. Small ceremony, immediate family only for the toast this time, a detail I don't think was an accident. Sandra's speech, I'm told, stayed entirely on topic. Whether that was growth or just Amanda and Ryan learning to structure the event so there was less room for repeat performance, I genuinely couldn't tell you. Probably a bit of both, but I still think about that cake cutting moment more than almost any other family drama I've witnessed firsthand. 30 is a big one, 4 months early, called out over her own daughter's engagement cake. If you're looking for the platonic ideal of a golden child moment, the one so blatant it makes an entire room go silent, I don't think I'll ever personally witness a cleaner example than that. I've told the story a handful of times now to different groups of friends, and the reactions tend to split in a pretty predictable way. Some people laugh almost in disbelief. The way you laugh at something so absurd it circles back around to being funny. She did what during the cake cutting? Others go quiet, and I can tell from their faces that they're not laughing because they've got a version of this exact story sitting in their own family history, and watching someone else's unfold out loud has knocked something loose in them. A friend of mine, Chris, different Chris, not my cousin, told me afterward that hearing the story made him realize, for the first time, why he'd always felt a specific, hard-to-name resentment toward his own older brother, even though his brother had never done anything overtly wrong to him. It wasn't the brother. It was the machinery around the brother, the parents who couldn't help but redirect every room toward him, the way Sandra couldn't help but redirect every conversation toward Chris. My friend said he'd never had language for that dynamic until he heard about the cake-cutting comment, and something about the specificity of it, the 30 is a big one, 4 months premature, made the whole pattern click into focus for him in a way vaguer descriptions never had. I think that's part of why this story has stuck with me as long as it has. It's not really about Sandra or Chris or even Amanda specifically, even though it happened to them. It's a kind of Rorschach test. The level of detail is so specific, so almost absurdly on the nose, that it ends up functioning as a mirror for a lot of people's own family dynamics, even when the particulars don't match at all. I've turned this over in my head a lot, trying to understand not just what Sandra did, but why. I don't think it was strategic or cruel or even fully conscious. I think what I watched that night was 30+ years of habit running on autopilot, a groove worn so deep into how Sandra related to her children that she genuinely could not shut it off, even in a setting explicitly designed to celebrate the child that groove had never quite made room for. There's a particular kind of parent, I think, who builds their whole identity around one child's achievements, not necessarily out of malice toward the other child, but because it's simply easier, more immediately gratifying to attach your sense of pride to the kid whose wins are loud and legible: the promotions, the swim meets, the honor roll certificates. Amanda's wins were quieter: a demanding degree, a steady career helping people recover from injuries, a genuinely healthy, stable relationship with someone who clearly adored her. None of that gives you an easy toast line. None of that gives you something to brag about at a dinner party in 30 seconds. And I think, watching Sandra that night, that she'd simply never developed the muscle for celebrating the quiet kind of success, because she'd spent 3 decades only ever exercising the muscle for the loud kind. That doesn't excuse it. Amanda deserved a mother who could learn a new muscle for her, especially on the one night that was supposed to be unambiguously hers. It's helped me hold a slightly more complicated view of Sandra than pure judgment. She's not a cartoon villain. She's a woman who built a very specific, very narrow definition of what pride is supposed to look like, and then couldn't find her way out of it even when it was actively hurting the daughter standing 3 feet away from her, cutting a cake, smiling the specific smile of someone who'd trained herself over decades not to give her mother the reaction she seemed, on some unconscious level. Keep fishing for. There's one more detail I haven't mentioned yet, mostly because it happened months before the engagement party and I didn't fully understand its significance until after I'd watched the cake cutting unfold. The previous Christmas, at a regular family gathering, Amanda had mentioned almost in passing that she'd been offered a supervisory role at the physical therapy practice where she worked, a genuine promotion, more responsibility, a meaningful pay bump. He brought it up during a lull in conversation, clearly a little proud, clearly hoping for some acknowledgement. Sandra's response, verbatim as best I can remember it: "Oh, that's nice, honey." Then, within about 15 seconds, a full pivot into an update about Chris's fantasy football league standings, which had apparently been the topic of conversation before Amanda's announcement, and which Sandra seemed eager to return to. The time, I remember thinking it was just an awkward, forgettable moment, the kind of small letdown every family has occasionally, not necessarily meaningful on its own. It was only after watching the engagement party toast 7 months later that I understood it wasn't an isolated, awkward moment at all. It was the exact same groove, worn just as deep, just executed on a smaller stage with a smaller audience. The engagement party didn't introduce a new pattern. Just happened to be loud enough and public enough that everyone in the room finally saw the pattern all at once, instead of each of us catching only our own private glimpse of it over the years. That's the thing about golden child dynamics, I think, that makes them so hard to name and so easy to dismiss from the outside. Most of the actual evidence lives in small moments like the Christmas comment, quiet enough that any single instance can be explained away, waved off, forgot. Usually takes something as loud and undeniable as a birthday announcement during someone else's cake cutting for the whole shape of it to finally become visible to everyone at once, instead of just to the person who's been quietly living inside it their whole life. If you've got a golden child story of your own, I'd genuinely like to hear it. I used to think mine was one of the wilder examples out there. 6 months of telling this story to different people has taught me it's really just one entry in what turns out to be a very, very long and very familiar list.